This first story didn't happen to me, but an old friend. Story 1. Where to begin? So this story was told to me from a woman who owns a dog boarding business, then was relatively set back from the road and was surrounded by woods with a long winding gravel driveway. The place consisted of her home with a reception area and attached to a much larger barn-looking building where the kennel was connecting the two. It was quite a serene location where she lived by herself with her newborn baby daughter. One night while her daughter was sleeping in the crib, the woman, let's call her Miranda, and her friend were out on the deck at the back of her house. By this time in the evening, probably 7 or 8 p.m, the kennel had closed. It was summertime, so it was just starting to get dark. It was maybe closer to fall, because up here in New York it stays light for a while. She and her friend were sitting there chatting and relaxing with a nice view of the woods. This house is surrounded by woods on all sides, but the deck faces the deepest part of the woods, which probably goes for miles. There really aren't any neighbours nearby, so to say it's desolate would be an understatement. It was dusk and getting dark when Miranda noticed something weird in the woods. Her friend saw it too, a weird light moving up and down in the distance. It was too dark to really tell what it was until they realised that it was a man holding a flashlight running full speed towards them. As any normal person would, they freaked the hell out and ran inside. By this point the man was not only sprinting right towards them, but he was yelling and screaming as loud as he could. I never asked exactly what he'd said while running towards them, but I got the impression that it was just nonsense or loud noises. They literally got inside at just the last minute when he got to the steps of the deck. They managed to lock the back door, but he was pounding and screaming, "Let me in," at the door. Once the man realised that he couldn't open the door, he turned around and walked away. It was pretty dark at this point, and the sun was setting, so dusk had just about turned to night. It was then that Miranda realised the man hadn't left, but was going around the side of her house to check the windows. Since her home is older, there was no AC, so she had the habit of opening all the windows in the summertime evening to get fresh air into the house. She told me that it was almost like as she went to every window to close it, he would be there, following her window after window, with her closing them with just enough time to spare. Once the windows were closed and they were fairly certain the man couldn't get in, for a little while anyway, they went to call the police. It all happened so quickly that this was the only second they had to do so, since they had no spare time to stop and call. It was at this point that they realised they left their phones on the table outside on the deck. They'd run inside so quickly they didn't think to grab their phones. While all of this is happening, the man is still ferociously banging on various windows and scratching on the doors. Luckily for Miranda, her house was attached to the dog kennel reception area. You had to go through the reception area to get to the kennel. It was sandwiched between her house and the dog area, but they were connected by interior doors. They army crawled their way through the reception area and got to the phone. As they were dialing 911, the man was at the window nearest reception, literally right next to the phone, pounding and screaming, "You fucking bitch, let me in!" They waited and eventually the man left and the police arrived. They searched the area thoroughly in depth and did not find the man. They did, however, find a spot near where they first saw the light. There appeared to be evidence pointing to the conclusion that he was standing there watching them for a while before deciding to do whatever he was trying to do. I don't know why he turned on a flashlight and decided to run towards them, since he clearly gave himself away, but they're lucky he did, because if he hadn't, then who knows if it would have been too late for them to run inside. This man was never caught or seen again, and the creepy part is that one of the employees of the kennel said that earlier that day they noticed a strange man walking around behind the kennel, and when they approached him he had said he was a friend of Miranda's and that he was taking out the trash. When asked about this, Miranda said that she had no such friend over. Story 2. This story I actually experienced myself. I had been working at this kennel for a while. I was in high school and it was a good gig. We worked until 9 p.m. every night. This happened after story 1. After that she decided to change the shifts around so there were employees there a little later. Reception at this place closes around 6 p.m. and customers who wanted to pick up or drop their dogs off had to schedule a time before 5. All of the dogs had been picked up or dropped off for the day, and my co-worker James and I were closing up. It was 9 p.m. and we went to the reception computer to clock out. After doing so, I noticed on a separate monitor, which showed security cameras. After story 1, she had cameras and alarms installed for obvious reasons, that there was a clear set of headlights coming down the driveway. By this point, we had turned all the lights off in the building because we were about to leave. The car just stopped about halfway down this long gravel driveway and sat there for a little while. It was a thin driveway that only one car could fit down. It sat there for a while and my co-worker James decided to give Miranda a phone call to see if she was having any friends over, because this kind of thing is very unusual here. She said that she was not, and she came out through her locked door that was attached to the inside of her house, into the reception area and talked to us. All the while the car was sitting there with the lights on. We were spooked, the three of us standing there in the pitch-black reception watching out the corner of the window. Eventually, after a few minutes, the car backed out of the driveway and seemingly left. We all sat there for a little while waiting until the coast was clear. Miranda went back to her house and James and I went to leave. Employees usually parked out the back of the building, but ever since the event from story 1, Miranda had employees move their cars to the main parking area once reception closed. That way they didn't have to walk down the creepy driveway into the woods area where the other parking was. Luckily for me, earlier I had moved my car to the front, so I was a little less spooked to go outside, since it wasn't that long of a walk. James and I were standing inside talking for a few minutes when he told me that I could leave and that he was going to stay a few minutes longer. I said goodbye and opened the door to leave. I walked down the porch and to my car, got in, turned it on, and went to reverse. It was at that moment that I saw the headlights again. I stopped my car, I hadn't moved more than a few feet, and briskly walked back towards the door to get inside, where I saw James coming out. I told him that they were back and to get inside. Once inside, we made sure the alarms were on and set, and we called Miranda again. James had her on speakerphone and she was talking about how she was going to get her shotgun and go out there to fire a few warning shots into the air. She doesn't mess around since story 1. I expressed that that was not a good idea and that it would be best if she stayed inside with her daughter to stay on the phone with James while I called the police. I had just about finished dialing 911 when all of a sudden the alarm started going off. Loud. The dogs were all barking and I was shitting my pants. I had told the story to the operator and that the intruder alarm was going off and that the car was still in the driveway. A little while goes by and the car was still sitting there and there was no sign of the police. I called them back and they told us that they'd sent the police to the wrong address. Eventually the car reversed out and drove away. Then police showed up. They looked around and stayed until my co-worker James and I left. I was definitely freaked out, but the creepiest part is yet to come. The next day I came back to work, and my boss Miranda pulled me and James aside. She said she wanted to show us something. She showed us that not only had the alarm been triggered on the back door to the reception area, but she had the security camera footage of the driveway that night. You can clearly see the car pull into the driveway, but what we didn't see in person was that the car door seemingly opened and someone, or some people, I don't know, got out of the car and walked behind the trees in front of the house on the driveway. You could clearly see that there was light from someone's phone illuminating an area behind a tree, like someone was texting or something while watching us. We counted 2 lights from behind trees that moved around, so we assumed that there were multiple people standing out there, watching. She showed the footage to the police, but they obviously couldn't do anything, since all you could see was car lights and lights from phones. Nothing else ever came of that, but soon after I quit to pursue a different job. I have to say I don't miss that place whatsoever. And I will say that this woman was affiliated with some shady people, so who knows what these people wanted or who they were. All I know is that I'm never going to go over there at night again. This is a story of a disturbing cleanup that I had to take care of as a car detailer. I worked as a car detailer at a dealership for a few years. The boss had a small truck towed in one day and asked myself and another detailer to see if we could clean it out. We had taken care of some bad smelling and filthy vehicles before, so we figured this was the same kind of deal. We were wrong. Before even opening the truck, we smelled it. Nasty, rotten, thick air surrounding the truck. I asked my co-worker if he'd ever smelt anything like it. He shook his head. I walked over and opened the door. The smell of something dead rushed out. It was overwhelmingly sickening. I went and talked to the boss about the unbearable smell. He was trying to get some money out of it. The guy who bought it died not very long after purchasing the truck, so if possible he wanted to get it back to sell in condition. He said he wanted the seats gutted because he bought all new seating. I still informed him that cleaning it was nearly impossible. The smell was making everyone sick. I pretty much said that I needed some type of breathing apparatus for myself and anyone brave enough to help me try to clean the vehicle out. So he bought us painting jumpsuits and full face masks. It didn't help a bit. If we didn't have those items, it would have not been possible. The guy I worked with was a veteran detailer. He had many years of cleaning up and detail cleaning vehicles. He told me he had never had a case like that truck. We began to take the car apart and bag the old seats in plastic bags. We shampooed the carpets and washed out the engine. We scrubbed and conditioned the vinyl of the dash and interior. It was looking way better. We attached the new seats and looked for anything else we could clean up to get the lingering smell out. My co-worker sat in the driver's seat and contemplated buying the little truck. But we both forgot a major place to clean up. He reached down and turned on the AC full blast. A bunch of burnt little brown and black things flew out at him, all over his face and chest. These things hit him. The smell was there again. But whatever happened in that truck wasn't able to be washed off. We got close, but when it would sit in the sun for any amount of time, the smell would be back. We later found out what happened. Apparently a guy died in the truck. They didn't find him for a while. By the time they found him, he was swollen and split, and he was covered in maggots and flies. I guess since the weather was hot, it sped up the process of decomposition. Those things that flew out of the AC were burnt and cooked maggots. An officer came by and filled us in. My co-worker vomited. The smell of death is strong. It's very hard to get rid of if you can at all. No matter how hard we cleaned, I'm sure there would be some kind of residue somewhere. But maybe the truck was never to be sold again. Maybe it's just a smell that is not possible to remove. But it was a horrible experience. But I'm sure the officer had it much, much worse. For some background, when I was a child, I would sleepwalk a lot. I would talk to people in my sleep, and I would often scream too. I only remember glimpses of the night frights I had which caused these things. My bedroom was at the end of the upstairs hallway, and my sister's bedroom was to the right of mine. Every day when the sun went down, I would always sprint past her bedroom door to the stairs and run down them, absolutely terrified I'd be chased. I felt this way because of dreams I'd had this night, dreams of a figure in a black cloak covering them from head to toe. In the dreams I would see the figure standing in the blackness of my sister's bedroom, staring at me. One day as I walked past the room, I glanced in and my heart stopped as I saw the figure again, standing there and staring at me, the orange light from the street lamps shining around her as it stood there. I froze in place, my eyes wide as it stared into me. I felt a coldness, until my sister's voice said, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I looked to my left to see her at the top of the stairs. I glanced back to the room and the figure was gone. Hence why I would sprint past every time it was dark. This was when I was ages 4 to 7. Then one day I had one last dream about the figure. It took the perspective of a parking lot CCTV camera. A grey image with the white noise, fuzzing as a white line would skim past. The whole shebang. The cloaked figure approached the camera from afar, my heart pounding harder and harder, until the figure reached the camera and pulled down its hood. This was when I discovered it was a woman with long black hair, a clean face and dark beady eyes, and it wasn't a cloak at all, but a long black dress. Now fast forward to me at age 15. My sister has since moved out, and I've spent the past 5 years living in her room. Not a single day did I think of the woman with the long black hair, since I'd seen her face in that dream behind the black cloak. One day me and my friend were at his house, joking around and watching Terminator. We were ridiculing the jumpy 80s music that we felt now aged only dampened the intensity of the film. In front of me and to his right were 2 large windows across the wall, showing outside into the street. To get to the front door you had to walk past these 2 windows. Anyone coming or going, we saw them. Suddenly we heard what sounded like the front door open. It had the squelching sound a refrigerator has due to the plastic suction along the hinges. We both looked to each other confused, and then we heard the door suddenly slam shut and a cold breeze rushed through the house. We both grabbed the closest things to us. For me, hair straighteners from his mum's coffee table. For him, an empty bottle of Coke. With our new weapons, we walked through the doorway and down the corridor to the door. I peeked through the peephole and saw nothing. We turned and his mum left her room shouting at us, "Stop fucking with the door, the pair of you!" Even more confused, we said, "It wasn't us. Was it not you?" She scoffed and told us to quieten down before she returned to her bedroom. We walked back into the living room completely freaked out. We'd both heard it, and so had his mum, so we weren't loopy. We wondered what had happened for nearly an hour before I walked to the front door getting ready to leave, before hearing a noise come from outside. I looked through the peephole and my friend flicked the light switch off. I turned back and gave him a funny look. "Don't do that," I remarked before looking back to the peephole, and suddenly I jumped back, terrified, as I saw a blonde woman stood in the light of the porch light staring at the peephole. I screamed and backed away. He jumped back confused and I took a breath before opening the door really quick. The woman stood there looking horrified. She then asked, "Is Nikki there?" My friend's mum. So we let her in. It was just a false alarm. She wasn't a demon or a ghost, but she wasn't what was here an hour ago. We laughed it off and went home. I went home. Later that night I was on webcam with a girl I had recently started speaking to. We barely knew each other really. All I knew was she was a religious nut and never lied about anything, and all she knew about me was I was famous at school for being the class clown. We talked and talked for a few hours before my grandmother texted me asking for my birth date, but not the date, the specific time I was born. I had no idea, so I walked downstairs to ask my dad. He looked over for a mere moment before answering. "I dunno, check the baby book." So I did. I found out and texted her back. I spoke to my dad for a few minutes before returning to my bedroom to talk to my female friend. I sat down and she looked up from her phone and casually mentioned, "Your mum was looking for you, did you see her?" "Huh?" "Your mum, she walked in looking for you." "What do you mean?" "She came in and looked around for a moment, and as she looked at the camera, I covered mine and looked down at my phone. I looked back up a few seconds later and she'd walked out." This was weird for a few reasons. 1, my mum wasn't home. She was in London for a business meeting. 2, I was with my dad downstairs, who was the only other person in the house. And 3, because of her answer when I then asked what she looked like. A woman with long black hair in a long black dress. So first off, I would like to say this is 100% true. Now weirdly, while this whole story involves me, I didn't witness a thing. So, some pretext. I have been vacationing at private campgrounds my whole life. My family owns property in the Mohawk Trails not too far from Heath, Massachusetts. Beautiful land, historic property. Everywhere you go you can see stone structures and property line dating all the way back to the time the Mohawk Indians used to own the land. Like I'd said, I've been camping there my whole life and still do. Nothing ever happened, paranormal at least, until this one time. Go back about 5 years. My brother still calls this my Skinwalker story, although I'm not totally convinced. It is weird though. So 5 years ago, me, my brother and my 2 cousins were camping for the weekend. It was a very calm and peaceful weekend. I was at the private lake fishing off the dock, not catching anything good. I caught a pickerel and tossed it into the woods and continued fishing. Suddenly I hear my name. "Josh?" come from the right side of the dock, a good distance away. Now where the dock was, if I looked right, I could see the expanse of land that wraps around the lake. but there were trees and shrubs blocking my view of the path. That's where the voice came from. I recognized it as my little brother, so I called back, "I'm on the dock!" I see him around the corner and he stared at me, bewildered. He looks back in the woods and back at me, so I ask him, "What's up? Were you just in the woods? Like, running through the woods?" He looked confused. "No," I said. "How could I be in there and be back here so quickly?" I replied. He looked back in, then back at me again and says, "Dude, I just saw you in there, but you were running that way." He points back in the direction he came from. "But I couldn't hear twigs snapping or leaves rustling. That's the weird part," he said. And mind you, back then I was around 290 pounds. I was a big guy. I'm now down to 210, and I'm proud to say that I'm in the military. But that's beside the point. Now remember how I said I threw a fish in the woods? I then realised I could no longer hear it flopping around anymore, and I threw it in around 5 minutes prior. So I go to look for it. It's gone. I searched a 30-foot radius. It was just gone, and there was no sign of any animal coming through and grabbing it. So that was very odd, and to this day my bro tells the story. But then that same day my mother comes up to me at our site and asks me, "Josh, did you go into the female shower room at the rec hall?" She was upset. I say, "No, are you insane? Why would I go in there?" Apparently she was trying to find an explanation, because I found out a few days later she followed what she thought was me into the shower room, and this figure was nowhere to be seen. And lastly, something not involving me. My two cousins were from different sides of the family and they didn't know each other that well, so the last night we were there, my cousin, I'll call here Kerry, wakes up in bed as the sun is beginning to rise. She turns over and sees my other cousin, I'll call him Jose, sitting in a chair and listening to music through some headphones, staring out of the window. So she turns back over to try and fall back to sleep, but she can't. She feels uncomfortable since they don't know each other. She turns back and he's completely gone. Later on she discovers that he'd never left his bed. He was still asleep. So there's my story. It's all 100% true, and if you have any questions feel free to ask, but I can't guarantee I'll have an answer. Living in a small town, one of my favourite things to do is cruising the back roads and exploring. I've always been fascinated to see where the drive takes me, checking out scenery and happening upon houses that I wouldn't normally see on the main roads. And sometimes I like to travel some of the roads I have previously discovered after dark. Sometimes. When I was around 13 or 14, one of my adventures led me to a little church named Apple Chapel. At this age I was still too young to be driving, but my uncle, the antique dealer, shared this passion with me. It's in the middle of nowhere in southern Indiana. Attached to the church is a small, quaint graveyard to the right. On the left is a gravel parking lot. It is surrounded by woods. To see this place in broad daylight most people wouldn't bat an eye. It's actually not spooky looking. On the day of discovering the small lane that led to the church, I got spooked nearly a mile before passing Apple Chapel. Didn't even see it yet, let alone know it was there. I remember feeling strange, got goosebumps, the whole 9 yards. So did my uncle. He turned the music off and slowed the car. This is still during the day. My uncle asked me, "Do you feel that?" "Yep, it feels like we shouldn't be here for some reason," was my response, or something similar. "What do you think it is?" He slammed the brakes, nearly choking me with the seatbelt. At first I was looking at him, but I instantly followed his gaze. There it was, the church with its tombstones. I saw the graveyard first because it was on my right side, nearly 15 feet away or so. I caught my breath and was thinking I was too young for a heart attack. It was instant bad vibes. Although it didn't look creepy, it felt creepy. We later confided with each other that it was almost as if we could feel vibrations, actual physical vibrations, emanating from all around us. So my uncle pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car. I hesitantly followed. We didn't say much at this point, but I could tell he was shaken up by this place, to the extent that I could see his hands slightly tremble when he lit a cigarette. We didn't stay long, just walked through the cemetery looking at different headstones, then left. It was eerie.
The way we both felt something ominous and out of place at the same time. Really fucking weird. That was the beginning of several more visits to Apple Chapel. What frightened us also fascinated us. When at school I asked around to see if anyone had any information about the place, but no one did. I checked the local library and found nothing. Basically, I couldn't find anything about the little church in this remote location. To this day I have not encountered anyone who has had bad feelings, ghost stories, or anything unusual happen to them from Apple Chapel. The first time my uncle and I went there after nightfall was nothing to brag about really, but we still felt an evil presence, and the creep factor was through the roof. If I remember correctly, there might have been a security light on the parking lot side of the building, but not the graveyard side. Seems like that was the case. We drove by crawling at a snail's pace, it being on the passenger side of the car. Go figure, right next to me if the dead suddenly sprang to life. Not that I believe in that, but it was part of the creep factor. I remember the moon being out but not bright. We heard twigs breaking in the woods nearby. It was probably a deer, but other than that it was too quiet. No other sounds, period. No frogs, owls, crickets, or even noise from the wind. Just dead silence, the twigs, and the sound of the tyres on the pavement. We decided to leave. After leaving, it took us both several miles to shake the uneasiness. Hell, I still felt it after arriving back home. Now this was not a nightly occurrence. We knew better than to take a midnight cruise out there too often. Occasionally, though, we would take someone with us. One time on an after-dark cruise, I brought one of my friends along for the ride. We were having fun, jamming to music, talking and whatnot. My uncle made it a point to avoid Apple Chapel that night, driving 25 miles south of it on the highway. On the return trip home, he decided to use his GPS and take some country roads back. This was not in the vicinity of the chapel. About 45 minutes later, travelling roads we had never been on before, his GPS suddenly goes bonkers and croaks. It just started going fuzzy-like and died, which it shouldn't have because it was wired through the car and used the car's battery. So now we were lost, in an unfamiliar neck of the woods, with a little less than half a tank of gas. Fuck. About 5 or 6 minutes later we see the damn church. 2 notes here. 1, we were familiar with the area surrounding the church, even after midnight, and we didn't notice anything we recognised before seeing the church. And 2, my uncle didn't plan for this as he intentionally wanted to avoid it that particular night. My uncle's face went from trying to joke about being lost to, oh shit, real quick. Needless to say, I informed my buddy of finding Apple Chapel by accident and how it freaked me out, yet still felt compelled to check it out every so often, like drawn to it. He laughed it off and joked around, blah blah blah. We made it back home safely. I will never forget this. We should have stayed far away from the chapel, but we didn't. We couldn't. On a school night, after talking with my uncle and reminiscing about our ghostly experiences, for some reason we had quite a lot of encounters together, he asks me if I wanted to take a short cruise. As the next day I had school, I was reluctant, but agreed. Our destination was, of course, Apple Chapel. This was around 9:30, 9:45 p.m. From where I lived, it took about 20 to 25 minutes to get there, where we'd be gone for an hour tops. Okay, sure, let's go. We were almost there and the hairs on my arms start to stand on end. Chills travel up and down my spine. I can feel it in my bones. Suddenly my teeth chatter. It feels like the temperature had dropped 15 degrees. The car thermometer read 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but I'm pretty sure the temperature did in fact drop. The church comes into view from the headlights shining on it. It was pitch black tonight. No moon. Also no security light. My uncle pulls the car slightly off the road and comes to a stop. I just want to look around for a few, then we will head back home, he says. I shrugged and said, okay. We have done this before, just parked next to the graveyard, got out and walked a bit, just seeing if anything weird would happen. He shut the car off, extinguished the headlights and got out to the front of the car, just to my side of the vehicle. No more than a minute had passed. I was ready to get my ass to bed. Uncle James, I have school tomorrow. Nothing is happening tonight. It's too dark to really see anything anyway, and I'm freezing. Let's go. That's all I said. Yeah, you're right. Let's boogie back, he replied. This all happened within a minute or two of him shutting the car off. So, he gets in the car and turns the key over. Nothing. Tries again. Still nothing. He tries a third time, but to no avail. You can hear the starter grow weaker through each attempt. Keep in mind that the car is in pretty good shape. He's had no problems with it besides the GPS going out, and now this. He even had the GPS looked at but never had it fixed. No signs of any trouble whatsoever. I'm freaking the hell out. James, this can't be happening. What the fuck do we do? I've got school tomorrow. We don't have a cell phone. Why tonight? I literally sounded like a frantic girl. Thanks puberty and sheer terror. I'm a guy, by the way. The more we tried to start the car, the weaker it got. I tried jumping the solenoid, but nothing. We tried everything we could possibly think of with the car, but nothing worked. We had to stay the fucking night. We were definitely not going to walk several miles in either direction at this time of night. Not way out in the sticks. We could be food for coyotes or other creatures of the night. We could wander onto someone's property and be shot at. Anything was possible. It seemed like hours passed, and there we sat in the cold-ass car trying to survive for the night. I'd say the temperature was in the mid-30s at this point. I finally got the nerve to check the trunk. Maybe there was something there we could use for warmth. My uncle got out with my scared ass. That's when we heard it. A sharp crack, such as an axe splitting wood or something similar. It came from the opposite side of the road down in the woods a little ways. And at the exact same moment we heard what sounded like deep, quiet chuckling in the woods behind the cemetery. "What the fuck was that?" my uncle says. I reply, "I dunno, and I hope we don't find out." I called out to see if I would get a response. Nothing. Then we saw what looked like the faint glow of an old lantern about 20 to 30 feet behind the tree line of the graveyard. It swung lightly, and we only got a brief glimpse of it before it disappeared. This took place while I did indeed find a flimsy, thin blanket in the trunk, something my uncle used to wrap around Antique that he'd forgot about. "Fuck this, help me push the car past the church and next to the gravel lot on the other side," I told my uncle. We managed to do so too. By this time it was past midnight, and the entire time of being stranded not a single car had gone by. By 2 a.m. our fear had subsided slightly. Around 2:30 we heard what sounded like a baby crying behind us, further up the road beyond the cemetery. I'm pretty sure it was a coyote, but it still put me on edge again. Around 3 a.m. I heard something that I couldn't distinguish, and when I looked at the graveyard behind us, I swore I saw blackness moving in the darkness, like shadows. It's likely it could have been tree limbs moving, but I don't believe that. My uncle saw it too, and we thought it was some dark entity. Who knows? I finally crashed from my adrenaline rush shortly after. When I woke up, it was turning daylight. My uncle said someone went by but didn't stop. So we put the car at an angle in the road, forcing whoever was next to come to our rescue. It was a school bus. The driver said he'd radioed it in. We moved the car so he could be on his way. 2 more vehicles passed. We put the car back at an angle, and finally a DNR guy helped us. We didn't tell him exactly what happened, only that the car died and wouldn't restart as we were passing through. The very next day my uncle was in front of a prestigious hotel in our area. He was stopping to get gas. Before he turned into the gas station, the car caught on fire. He left it sitting at the intersection, and before he reached the gas pumps, the car literally exploded. We always said that a demon got into the car that night. It's hard to say that for sure, but I'm a true believer in the paranormal.